Every Starfield playthrough has that one moment. The moment when you land on a planet thinking, wow, look at the plants and the weird little aliens running around and the points of interest spread out in front of me. So you start walking to one, but oh, that abandoned camp looks kind of similar to the one on that other planet, no? And this mining outpost looks exactly the same as the one I saw 5 hours ago. Reused assets aren't exactly rare to see in open-world RPGs. When creating games at this scale, developers are forced to reuse certain portions of the visuals, locations, and level design. Every open-world game, and most games in general, suffer from this problem to at least some degree. From the copy-paste Ubisoft trash all the way to FromSoft's genre-defining masterpieces. It's an issue that many games have attempted to fix, with varying degrees of success. And Starfield is an example of a game that, how do I put this lightly, struggles more than others. Starfield is a great game, and the stuff it gets right, it really gets right. But for as much as Starfield achieves, the open world exploration is a step down from the Elder Scrolls and Fallout. The planets and locations contained within don't feel like meaningful pieces of a larger galaxy to work through. They feel disjointed, repetitive, and inconsequential. You don't get that comfortable feeling of slowly conquering the land before you even after you've explored the same planet for hours. Because for every bit of progress you make clearing out POIs, another 10 identical abandoned camps are just over the horizon. I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out why games like Skyrim are so satisfying to thoroughly explore, while Starfield just isn't. And through complex scientific calculations from some of the world's brightest minds, I have finally developed an exact numerical criteria for calculating the fun level of any given open world. Okay, not really. This will actually just be the ramblings of a giant nerd with social anxiety and too much time on his hands. But regardless, join me on this journey as we explore why Starfield's space exploration falls flat. Two of the most touted features shown off during Starfield's marketing push was its massive scale and its planetary exploration. It was at the 2022 Xbox Summer Showcase over a full year ago that we first learned about Starfield's 1,000 planets, and naturally, fans were alarmed. This was such a major departure from the carefully curated and expertly designed worlds of Skyrim and Oblivion and Fallout 3 and 4. Bethesda's worlds themselves are arguably the most important features of their games, and now they're trying to make 1,000 of them? I guess they're really shooting for the stars. I actually wrote that. Wow, okay. But yeah, part of the appeal of a game like Skyrim is how passionately crafted and properly fleshed out each location and region of the map can feel. Of course, there are repetitive points of interest and reused assets, but rarely does it feel like a straight-up copy-paste of one before it. There's usually at least some variation in the layout and level design of different caves, mines, and enemy camps. And more importantly, these locations have a sense of place within the world. Skyrim's western regions are dominated by the Forsworn tribes and their creepy villages that look like something out of the Blair Witch Project. The underground areas are home to the despicable Falmer and centuries of Dwemer architecture and automatons. The eastern provinces where Nords lay claim and practice the old ways, versus the west where politics reigns supreme and the Empire tries to make its presence known. You boot up Skyrim and after a little while, you forget that it's a video game you're playing. You're there, in mind and spirit, and in other ways, and rarely does it cross your mind that this is just a passionate rendition of a fantasy world. It feels like more than that. But with its incessant loading screens, overambitious scale, and extremely repetitive points of interest, Starfield struggles to maintain the same level of immersion. It feels manufactured and artificial when every planet has the same abandoned camps and science outposts, with the same layouts and the same generic space pirates at every single one. And that's not to say that Starfield has no variety whatsoever in its location or enemy design. There are fun and interesting things to stumble upon, and fighting terramorphs and other alien creatures is, in my opinion, the best combat encounters in the game. But a lot of that variety seems to be tied to individual missions and quest lines, rather than thoroughly integrated into the planetary exploration that was so emphasized pre-release. And that leads me into what I think is the fundamental flaw of this game's space exploration: the massive sense of scale that Bethesda went for. The concept of 1,000 planets is an exciting one, and combined with the procedural generation system in place, Starfield seems like a game with a near infinite amount of content. But Bethesda unfortunately went for a quantity over quality approach to planetary exploration, and it really shows. In trying to be the biggest game it could possibly be, Starfield sacrifices a lot of the intimacy present in Bethesda's previous titles. There's such a glaring discrepancy between Starfield's buzzing cities and towns full of intrigue and history versus the barren, isolated, and almost lifeless expanses of the wilderness on most planets. And it seems like that was by design. The planetary exploration side of this game is clearly going for a Matthew McConaughey and Interstellar thing, simulating what it would be like to expand humanity's reach across the galaxy. I can appreciate that they try to capture the essence of charting the stars, but most of these environments don't have enough soul, and I can't help but think that the need for 1,000 of them is the reason why. The moons are all so similar. The planets might look a little different from each other, but they contain miles of empty, meaningless space in between every generic POI. The lack of land vehicles is immediately noticeable, and trudging across a planet's surface in search of some rock or alien tree to scan doesn't bring the same satisfaction as combing the Jural Mountains of Skyrim or metropolitan Boston in Fallout 4. And from a game design perspective, I think there's a legitimate argument to be made against this idea of infinite content in an open world game. I expressed optimism towards the procedural generation elements of Starfield before release, but that was under the assumption that the game would retain the level of intimacy that Elder Scrolls and Fallout games have, and that's not really the case. While I don't think that Starfield's ambitious scale is this fatal flaw that completely ruins the game, its impact on exploration is felt pretty early on. Upon landing on a few different planets and taking the time to walk around and work through all the POIs available to you, you realize that the POIs just never really end, and the amount of planets to explore never really ends, at least for a long time. Again, this sounds good on paper in terms of getting a ridiculous amount of content for your $70, but it ultimately creates an unsatisfying gameplay loop that discourages you from engaging with the locations and game systems that are right in front of you. Video games play to the psychology of the human brain, primarily the dopamine release that occurs when we accomplish tasks. Those of us that love open world games feel that way because it's fun to slowly uncover each and every corner of a massive world. The feeling of making progress towards that goal is an essential part of the process, and it's an area where Starfield comes up woefully short. Exploring Skyrim is so fun because over time you really get to know Skyrim. You move through its different areas and biomes, essentially conquering regions of the map. You might start in Whiterun, working your way around the outskirts of the city, discovering the farms littered outside the castle walls. Then you make your way east and find caves and standing stones and Waldheim towers, and on as the map becomes dotted with different POIs you found and places you visited. You almost feel like a cartographer charting these unexplored magical vistas, and as your map fills up like a visual representation of your adventure, you get that sense of accomplishment. And it's not just Skyrim, it's Elden Ring and The Witcher 3 and Tears of the Kingdom and any number of open world games. There's a reason why these games are designed in such a way. It's meant to inspire you to keep pushing, to keep uncovering new frontiers, new discoveries in pursuit of the ultimate goal, seeing everything the game has to offer. When I play Skyrim, I want no stone unturned. I want every fast travel point on the entire fucking map. I want to see everything. And even though some places might feel a little repetitive, I want to continue to make progress towards that end goal, because chasing that feeling of accomplishment is so satisfying and rewarding. It's the same reason I found every dungeon in Elden Ring, or every shrine in Tears of the Kingdom. They may not be essential to beating the game, but they're worthwhile endeavors to players that want to experience everything a game has to offer because of that satisfaction at the end of the tunnel. The feeling that you didn't just do the bare minimum to beat Elden Ring, you beat Elden Ring. You conquered that motherfucker. And even if you're not a completionist and you don't bother 100%ing these games, the fact that there's an end goal is what makes the journey feel worthwhile, however much of it you end up playing through. But Starfield's problem is that that feeling isn't waiting for you, because the game essentially doesn't really end. The POIs will just keep going and going and going, and when I see that there's no end in sight and that it's not really an option to do most or all of it, I'd rather just do none of it. I'd rather just skip most of the planetary exploration stuff off and focus entirely on the questing that's this game's strong suit. And that's exactly what I find myself doing. I would have much preferred that the team just focus on building 5 different star systems with 20 or 30 planets total, with every planet truly fleshed out and unique. I know this is subjective, and I'm not trying to insinuate that every single person that picks up Starfield is going to have the same experience I had when exploring planets. I'm also not suggesting that 100%ing the entire map in an open world game is the only way to derive satisfaction from it. Starfield is not designed for completionists. Bethesda is asking you to prioritize certain gameplay elements that you personally find fun and to ignore the stuff that doesn't really interest you. That's kind of what Bethesda games are, an amalgamation of different systems that come together in a different way for everyone. I don't think Starfield is meant to be played in the same way that Skyrim and Fallout and other open world RPGs are played. You're not meant to search every nook and cranny of every planet for every available piece of loot. You're not meant to see everything. And I think that's why Bethesda was comfortable shipping this game with a lot of repetitive points of interest. They knew players would eventually come to terms with the fact that this is a fundamentally different game compared to their past titles. But on the other side of that, they did market the shit out of the planetary exploration side of this game, and with this move to a larger scale and seemingly endless open zones that aren't connected to one another, the classic open world elements of their formula have taken a hit. I know that based on this video, it probably sounds like I strongly dislike Starfield, but I really don't. I'm still having a great time with this game, soaking up the music and visuals and writing and atmospheres. In some ways, Starfield is a resounding advancement of the Bethesda formula, but I'm definitely ready for them to go back to the one huge, intimate, handcrafted map for Elder Scrolls 6. You know, when I'm playing Elder Scrolls 6 in my fucking adult diapers in between bingo games at the nursing home when the game comes out in 50 years. At the end of the day, I'm happy that Bethesda tried their hand at a game like this. It's good to see developers try new things, and the endlessness of Starfield was an interesting experiment that I'm glad the world got to see. I just hope they go back to their roots moving forward.